So it turns out that when you're driving along the road and you see them paving it, what they're doing these days is they're not just putting down asphalt, they're also putting down sensors. So if you're, and I know you had the situation because you're in Canada and I'm in Syracuse, so we both live at the North Pole as far as everyone's concerned. When the roads get icy, they need to be salted. The problem is when you add salt and you add all these chemicals, they run off, it destroys ecosystems, it's bad. So why don't embed sensors that can say, hey, I'm frozen, salt me, don't salt me, etc., reduce chemical impact. Well, these sensors, when you add them to things like automatic toll systems, when you add them to the black box in your car, when you add them to satellite data, GPS data, satellite radio, all these things, they're talking about that eventually being each mile of highway producing a gigabyte of data an hour. And if you add that all together, what you end up with is something on the range of 5 exabytes of data per year just on whether the roads need to be salted, right? So the reason transportation is in that is that their transportation, of course, is an information industry now. Medicine is an information industry. They're all information industries. And so the question becomes, of course, why are we all here? And what's our relation to them? And I would just like to recommend that if you have the chance, don't speak after the president of IPLA, who takes all your best stuff. I do, however, have one joke that you can use next time, which is, change is like heaven. Everyone thinks it's a great idea, but no one wants to go first. So I want to start with a story. You're probably wondering why there's a picture of apples up there, because I love apples, and I don't mean the company, though, you know. The apple tattoo, pretty soon. Anyway, I want to begin my story talking about innovation by actually talking about a little itty-bitty farm stand, which is about 30 minutes south of me in Lafayette, in Lafayette, New York, called Beacon Skiff. Now, Beacon Skiff, if, once again, our climates are the same, fall hits, right? It's usually like summer, fall. Right? And you've got those 3 weeks, and you go and you pick fresh fruit, you go pick fresh apples. So this is apple country that I live nearby. And so what you do is you drive, and there are these roadside stands. You stop, you pull over, you pick your own apples. And that's sort of how Beacon Skiff got started. But then they said, there are a lot of people coming. Why don't we, get really fancy about it? And they started using their tractors to pull people through the different orchards so that you could pick different varieties of apples at different time. And they said, well, that's going really great, but the kids are here. Let's bring out the ponies. And so you'd have pony rides and other rides. And then they're like, well, they're here. They might want to buy things like fudge, and they want to buy cider. And they so started a roadside stand, and that turned into fritters, and that turned into, if you look in the upper right hand, what they currently are doing is they've figured out they can build a distillery. And so if you want hard cider, you can buy 1911. 1911 is the year the farm was founded. You can buy 1911 cider, and you can now buy it in Syracuse, and now you can buy it in Rochester, and now they're going nationwide. They also, and I, once again, have no idea how to do this, but apparently you can turn apples into vodka. So, if the cider stuff's too mellow for you, you can go. And I was going to say hardcore, but there's just too many puns to go. Yeah, all right. The reason I tell you this story, and here's another pun, is it's an example of, ready for it, homegrown innovation. I think when we talk about innovation, we think about innovation, which is the theme of the conference. We have myths about them. We have concepts about them. We have whole structures that our societies and our organizations, our institutions and our media have trained us and enculturated us with concepts of innovation. And often they're images of Silicon Valley and startup companies and high tech and apps. And when I look at what happened in Lafayette, New York, I see innovation. This is agricultural innovation, the original maker society, which is they looked at what they did well, they looked at their local settings, they looked at the opportunities, and they said, that's where we're going to innovate from our strengths. And so the theme that I'm going to come back to again and again and again with this talk is that innovation is essential. Innovation is not only important It is part of being a librarian. I've taught classes. I teach our introductory classes, and I have this discussion board, and people can post anonymously any question they felt sort of awkward doing in class or didn't want to necessarily stand up behind. And one of them was, Lankes keeps talking about being an innovation and being an innovator. I want to be a really good worker bee. I can be a great worker bee. You tell me what you want to get done, and I'm going to do it. You tell me how you need to catalog these materials, I can catalog those materials. You tell me you do the reference test, I can do the reference test. Shelving, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. But I don't think I can be an innovator. I don't think I can be the one that comes up with the ideas. Now, normally, of course, what I'm supposed to do is start with it's okay, it's all right. But in fact, the response to that is, we don't have any room in this profession for worker bees. We may have at one time, but we're a pretty lean profession right now. And our communities and the needs of our communities and the needs of them to move forward, to become better educated, for economic development, for all sorts of things are so essential and so important that we can no longer simply afford to stand by and be worker bees, that simply do what's assigned to us. By the way, it also really undermines what bees do because they're like some kick-ass insects. And so, they, amazing things, as we're finding out by poisoning them, that, we kind of need them around. Back to apples. So my theme today is I want to talk about the idea of logical fallacies. Yay, great, yay, exciting. I just came, he's a professor, he's going to talk about logical fallacies. Great, epistemology, let's go. But I want to talk about false equivalencies to begin with. A false equivalency, as you may remember from mathematics, is simply these two things are not the same. Right? So 2 is not equal to 3. It's a false equivalency. But we do this all of the things. For example, speaking of apples, these things are not the same. So in Syracuse, we take our apples very seriously. Very seriously. For example, that thing that's red with the little leaf on it is not an apple. The thing is a monstrosity of large produce producers who have genetically engineered it not for taste, not for subtle texture, not for its ability to turn into vodka, new idea, but because it's pretty, it's red, they're big, and they don't bruise easily. When you bite into a red, delicious apple, you hear a crisp crunch because you are piercing a thickened skin that has been genetically engineered to last for days and days and shoved into kids' lunch boxes 20 to 30 months before they actually eat them. All right, maybe not 20 to 30 months, but really, come on. The other one, that beauty over there, is also, by the way, a genetic monstrosity. That is a Honeycrisp apple. Right now, all the organizers of the conference going, this is about libraries, right? The Honeycrisp apple is beautiful. It's actually a mix of Empire apples and Gala apples. It's got a high sugar content, but a very firm texture. And it only grows for about 1 to 2 week growing period. And if you take that apple and you put it in the freezer and you unfreeze it, it tastes like mush. So you have to eat it in like that 2 week period. And these varieties of Galas and Empires and Macoons and all of these things represent something that worker bees produce. Right? We can't do it without them, but at the same time, it's an innovation, it's a thought. And what I want to point out about this false equivalency is not just that those two things aren't equal, but that innovation isn't about an app, it can be about an apple. And that oftentimes when we look at these things, we simply assume, oh, yeah, that's farming. That's innovation. That took a dedication to understanding the community, a professionalism to understanding of the world that they operate to produce that. By the way, since I'm in Canada, I have to give another potential false equivalency. As Monsieur Carrier would point out, those are both hockey sweaters, but they are not equal. So I want to give you one more, and we're almost done with the philosophy, I promise. But one more, which is that there's a sort of special kind of false equivalency, and it's called the fallacy of composition. And the fallacy of composition goes that when one infers that something is true of the whole from the fact that it is true of some part of the whole. In essence, that is a fish. A fish lives in the ocean. The fallacy is, therefore, everything that lives in the ocean is a fish. And we know, if you watch the Super Friends as a child, that's not true. That's right. I went to Aquaman. Not only that, I went old school Aquaman. That's right. None of this Batman, Superman. Because let's face it, Superman's going to kill Batman. Is that really? Anyway. Right. This false equivalency, we do it all the time. So what I want to talk about is in library land, innovation fallacies. And what I want you to think about is that innovation does not equal big invention. And what I want to say is sometimes it does. I'm going to show you some examples of what some libraries are doing that is brilliant innovation. But if we take that innovation and we assume that every library, every setting, every librarian has to do that, that's where the fallacy comes in. All right? So let's just jump right into the first one. Innovation equals big invention. That conversation around being the worker bee, because it led to a conversation in class. And what I quickly identified is the word innovation itself is a scary word. It is a word that we tend to think of in almost like a godlike way. And particularly during the dot-com era and the dot-com recovery era and the pre-America destroys the economic system of the world era, right? The idea was that, innovation, that's Steve Jobs. That's people over there. They're it's Einstein, it's Edison, and all these other things, not little old me. And what I want to give you an example of is innovation can be you. Innovation should be everyone. If you can figure out how to check a book out, saving 3 seconds per book, that is an innovation. Because when you add up all the books, turns out you save a lot of time. And so what I want to just give you a couple of examples of is, first of all, the difference between innovation and invention. And then I want to give you some examples of how little things can lead to big things. So what I'm going to ask you for at the end of this is to recognize, realize, and own the fact that you're innovators. But I want you to understand what I'm not asking you to do is quit your job, move out to Silicon Valley, and go into debt. I'm asking you to look at what you do. Look at 2 feet in front of you. Look at 2 inches in front of you and say, as a professional, I've been assigned this task. Shelving, cataloging, opening, closing, whatever it is. Can I do that better? Just that much better. Maybe that much better. But get in that addiction to innovation. Get into that idea that you're going to constantly do a little bit. So why? And why is there a strange man holding a ball on the screen? That's Danny Biasone. I love Danny. Danny owned one of the first professional basketball teams, the Syracuse Gnats, the Syracuse Nationals, before the NBA. And Danny had a problem. Danny had a problem in the 1950s in that basketball was a god-awful, boring game. And I know I'm saying that as all the NBA players are coming to Toronto, and bring it on. That's what I'm saying. Because at the time, it was a defense game. So the idea is that you'd dribble the ball, you'd make a point, you'd get the ball back, you wouldn't go to make another point. You'd sit on the ball because you were ahead. Now you're getting there going, no, Dave, that's not how it works. But that's how it worked. And so the score of basketball games at that time were things like 15 to 20, right? 10 to 18. And Danny's sitting in the stacks trying to figure out how to get people to come into the stands, and he's going, this is boring. And so he looked around, and what he found was a college coach who also identified this and had come up with a solution. He had come up with something called the shot clock. He said, you have, once you're in possession of the ball, a certain amount of time to try and make a basket. If you go above that time, you lose the ball. And Danny looked at this, and he said, let's see, what do I want the scores to look like? 80 to 80. And he divided the score he wanted by the time, and he came up with 24 seconds. And 24 seconds changed the game. It changed the game, so suddenly it went from a defense game to an offense game. Suddenly, the big men had an advantage. Suddenly, it wasn't about strategy. It was about dunks. It was about driving the baskets. It was about speed. It became a faster game. It became a more physical game. And at the time, television stations were looking for the next sport. They had baseball, very exciting. They had football, which was kind of getting exciting, but they needed something else, and they found basketball. And so suddenly, that shot clock, that change, that I'm bored in the stands turned into a game, turned into contracts, turned into big money, which has led to $1 billion NBA franchise because someone was bored in the stands. He did not set out. I mean, he would have loved to create $1 billion industry, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was to improve the experience of what was happening. Give you another quick example. I needed a pop star, and I refused to put Justin Bieber up, so there's pandering to an audience, and then they're alone. Ever wonder why a pop song is 3 to 4 minutes long? No. It's not radio. You'd think it's radio. It is because when the first recording technology came out from Edison, which was a wax cylinder, before amplification, before microphones, they would literally have a band. They would have a huge bell that would go down to an itty-bitty needle, and then they would crank, and it would cause the etchings in the wax cylinders. And this is what they sold. Those wax cylinders can only store, wait for it, 3 to 4 minutes of music. So as that became an industry, as it became a way of making money, musicians, writers, producers, music companies wrote music specifically, popular music specifically for that technology. And as it moved from that to tape, to CDs, to cassettes, to LPs, to whatever we're streaming today, right? That stuck with it. So it wasn't because there's some magic sense, it's because technology, a technology affordance, a technology innovation led to this ability. One other quick story. Did you ever wonder who in the world came up with a 3-credit-hour course? Why is it that when you had to get your Master's of Library Science, you had to sit through 36 credit hours, or maybe you were in a rogue state that had quarter systems, right? And why are they semester longs, and why do they have 3 hours per week and all that? Where did it come from? Well, clearly it came from some organic natural invention. Well, Jessica Shedd put it this way. How did the metric of the student credit hour come to be? It is not an organic, naturally occurring entity, but an invented artifice, intellectually derived to serve a particular purpose. What was that purpose? I'm glad you asked. So if you were a professor in the day from the 1800s to the 1900s, and you had a job which was usually part-time and frankly didn't pay that much, and you retired, if you weren't independently wealthy, you had a problem. Turns out there's this guy by the name of Carnegie who had a few extra dollars lying around. And not only did he love to create libraries around the world, he figured that academia was kind of interesting, and he made an offer to the U.S. academics. He said, I'm going to give you $10 million. At the time, $10 million, big money. I'm going to set aside $10 million for a retirement and pension plan for professors. Yay! We call it TIA CREF these days, for those you may be familiar with it. He said, but I'm not going to do it, the Carnegie Foundation, I'm not going to do it unless you can define what your business process is. How much is a course? What is a credit? How does someone move through it? Because at the time when you went to college to become a librarian, frankly you didn't at this time, but if you did, you would just sit at the feet of a professor until they sort of said, done, right? And they said, no, because it turns out that on the board was the president of Harvard who said, I would love for you to be able to take this thing called an elective, where you can take other courses and drill down in different technology, but in order to do it, I've got to define what a course is, how long does it take, right? So in essence, the university academic system bought the money and created the 3-credit system, right? So once again, it didn't start out as how can we come up with transferable credits among universities. It started out as how can I make sure that we're getting the bang for our buck. This also brings up one other issue, which is that innovations are very much time sensitive. Because today, we are fighting against the 3-credit-hour system, against the semester system, so we can move to continuous and continual learning, so that we can give you academic credit for life experience, all of these kinds of things. And that innovation, which at the time created an amazing capacity for study, is now getting in the way. And so just because something was innovative, guess what? It doesn't get to keep that title throughout time. And in popular music, as seen by, for example, Rush, who decides to make an entire album out of one song. Go for it, right? So, logical fallacy 2, innovation equals entrepreneurship in business. And I'm going to steal this really brilliant idea. This is Meg Bacchus. She's currently in Alaska at the Anchorage Public Library, and is the smartest person I know. And Meg Bacchus was asked to study startups and entrepreneurships in libraries. She said, libraries are talking about starting business. They're talking about helping business. Go find out how they're doing it. So she went to public libraries, big public libraries, and said, how are you doing it? They said, oh, we have all these entrepreneurship programs. We have incoming in-residence people. We do classes. We talk about how to set this up. We teach, economics, etc. And she said, great. How's that working for you? And the librarians looked at her and said, what do you mean? She said, well, have you started any businesses? And the librarian said, like they're going to tell us? Like, yeah, like they're going to tell you. But what she really found when she looked into this is they'd have big rooms like this and tell them, you're going to start your business. Please prepare to start your business. Right? And what happened was someone had a really great idea. Well, by the way, we can't use that one anymore. Someone had a really great idea. Nope, can't use that one either. Someone had this is not such a great idea, when you have to make a phone call to your light to turn it on. Really? Anyway, but hey, we got them. Okay. When someone had a great idea in this sort of entrepreneurship frame, what that meant was, all right, you're going to start a business. You're going to lead to economic development, which inevitably meant you need capital. You need money to make this happen. You need to get a loan. You need to max out your credit card. You need to find an angel investor. You need to take on money, which meant risk. And so even people with fantastic, fabulous, wonderful ideas looked at that and said, no, it's not worth it to me. I have a great idea, but I'm not going into debt. I have a great idea, but I don't understand this whole thing of shares, and Shark Tank is lovely to watch, but they scare me, and I'm not doing this. And so what Meg said is she looked at this and she said, she goes, there's another way to do this. What if instead of connecting people with a great idea to capital, to risk, to the entrepreneurship, what if we connected them to the networks of people that we interact with on a regular day? What if we gave them access to the multitudes? She said, what you can get, and what we see through crowdfunding and Kickstarter campaigns, circulating idea podcasts, all these ideas, what if we distributed it out? We see this in open source all the time. We want a better integrated library system. Well, who's going to foot the bill? What if we all put a little bit of the bill and we get programmers and people to do part-time and all this stuff? Unix came out of this idea. Open source systems came out of this idea. We see this again and again. And this marketplace of ideas versus marketplace of money, this is where innovation can thrive. And this is our wheelhouse, folks. This is what we do better than anyone else. Connect ideas. Connect people with ideas, whether they're in books, whether they're in journals, whether they're in databases, or whether they're in the seat next to you, whether they're down the street. This is the thing that we can do. And so once again, there are some fabulous, once again, this is that composition issue. I want to be very clear. Some of the libraries that I know in this room are doing great jobs starting businesses. You're helping entrepreneurs. That's great. That's amazing. If that's what your community wants and needs and you're fulfilling it, yes. But many of you look at this and go, that's not what my community needs, or I don't really understand the whole finance world, or ooh, capital, right? You can be the marketplace of ideas where you're helping innovation get the resources they need to move forward. So this idea that innovation automatically means startups, no, innovation means a good idea. 8-year-olds have good ideas. 5-year-olds have good ideas. 85-year-olds have good ideas. 46-year-olds, right? How do you connect them? How do you move it ahead? Right? Innovation equals making for all. Next false equivalency. And that goes something like this. Aha, the future of libraries has arrived, and it's paved in plastic. Maker spaces. The idea of DIY. The idea that on the back of my phone, I'm very proudly show off my little fish that I printed myself on a vinyl cutter. Right? So this is the future of libraries, or as my wife, who's been a crafter for years, this is 1973. But this idea that what we're going to do is help people make and create, not simply consume. Brilliant, perfect, wonderful, do it all, yes, amen, go. That's my other speech. That they have to do it through 3D printing, or that this kind of new manufacturing technologies will automatically lead to equitable distribution of power in a society is wrong. Here's the secret that many people don't like talking about in the maker community. There was a study done by the Maker Media that produces the sort of premier magazine journal in the area. 8 out of 10 makers are male. Their median age is 44. Their average household income is $106,000 US. Nearly 83% are employed, and 31% have job descriptions that fall into the scientific and engineering categories. 97% are college graduates, and 80% have some postgraduate education. If you build a 3D printer, they will come. But they may not be the people you thought would come. They may look remarkably, I know, like me. This idea that somehow automatically the concept of DIY, the concept of making, the concept of manufacturing, the concept of the makerspace automatically leads to equitable distribution throughout a society is false. I have seen amazing things happen when you take this technology into underserved populations, into underperforming schools. It can happen. It can change lives. But simply adopting it, accepting it because someone else did it or that's the trend does not automatically skew or change the realities of your society. If you want to make the world in a different way, in a more equitable way, a more accessible way, realize that's hard work and never happens simply with a purchase order. We must talk about innovation for all, or we end up with innovation for the few that turn it into resources and materials that, once again, support the few. Innovation is equivalent to technology. That to innovate, you must have electrons involved at some point. This is the Pew Internet study, and what the Pew Internet study found, brilliant data, what they found is that 95% of teens in the United States have access to a smartphone. This is pretty cool. This is a really good number. In addition, Pew Foundation found that much of the frenzy of access is facilitated by mobile devices, right? So we know everyone's moving mobile. Nearly 3/4 of teens have access to a smartphone, and 30% have a basic phone, while just 12% of teens 13 to 17 say they have no cell phone at all. African American teens are the most likely of any group of teens to have smartphones, with 85% having access to one, compared with 71% of both white and Hispanic teens. This is a number that people in Washington, in areas, do and should applaud. This is fantastic. This is amazing. Then they make the false equivalency. Because people have access to the internet, they have the ability to control the internet. They feel that simply having access to the net means that they are somehow equally able to participate in society, to be involved with society. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you a quick rule of thumb. If you cannot create an app on the phone where you use apps, you are not fully engaged in society. If you cannot shape and shift the technology but simply consume it, you are not empowered. You are enslaved. We are looking at this technology and we say, look, it's solved. No, it's not. How can they shape it? How can they change it? How can they be part of it? What's amazing about a 3D printer is not that it's a 3D printer, it's the fact you can make a 3D printer with one. Right? How many of you seen this? Any of you in Makerspace land? You get the 3D printer, you introduce children to Tinkercad and Thingiverse. So Tinkercad, via the web, you can design stuff. Thingiverse, where you can put it, other people can download and get it. How many people see them instantly go to Thingiverse and go, oh, Mickey Mouse, I love Mickey Mouse, let me print that. And 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 then they get it, and they're like, I waited 5 hours for this piece of crap? It's one color and not as good as what I can buy at the dollar store. You're right. Because the whole point isn't to just print out the stuff that everyone else has made. It's to make something. Doesn't happen organically. Think about how much of our culture is pushing people down to consumption, who looks at people as users. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going to force you to do this. How many people, I'm going to ask you a question. Here it is. How many people feel that you seek to serve users? Please stand up if you would agree that you seek to serve users. Really, come on. It's okay. It's all right. Yes, there's a trick at the end, but it's all right. How many of you, stay standing, seek to be used? Aren't you glad I didn't use consumer? Okay, right? That's what it means, right? The whole user thing, while it started with empowerment, has increasingly turned into customer and consumer. Someone where we feed them the 3D printer, we feed them the information, somehow that's going to magically make it happen. We don't need more customers and consumers, we need citizens. We need people. We need students. We need scholars. We need artists and inventors and writers. We need chaos. We need people who feel they can own and create and shape society, not simply people who can read about it or have it documented. This is a great tool. This is not the tool that makes this the great tool, right? This is a great tool so long as you buy Apple's version of what you're allowed to get on it. So long as you have access to high-powered workstations and multi-$1,000 development stations with ready and rapid access to the internet that is not filtered or in some way linked or capped. Right? How are you going to change the universe with 10 gigabytes a month? It doesn't happen. Sorry, that might be a personal rail against AT&T. I apologize. There is no app to overcome the barriers of race, class, sexual orientation, and gender, and app building won't either. When you look at innovation in libraries and people instantly think it's about building apps, I draw your attention, if you will, to Ferguson, Missouri, where the innovation during a massive protest, during violence, during racial warfare, where a militarized police force, after the death of a black teen left bleeding in the street, when that community convulsed, the innovation of the library was twofold. One, they put out a sign that said, "Stay strong, Ferguson, we are all a family." And they turned their library into the schoolhouse, and they fed the children. That's innovation. Innovation doesn't become an app to report it, it becomes action, it becomes making it happen. In Baltimore, as the police let a man die in the back of a truck, and once again, the community convulsed, and with violence, they destroyed a downtown area with no public transportation in and out, thereby destroying their access to public facilities, food, and groceries. The Enoch Pratt Library, their innovation was to open the door the very next day and start handing out diapers, and start collecting money for legal aid services, and started having conversations on it. That's innovation. That's looking at something and saying, I can make it better. Does that come in an app? Maybe. Absolutely, there are fantastic apps. But it ultimately comes in a community's definition for the better. Public libraries were created out of a quest for societal equity. Our academic libraries have become part of that quest. We look at education as the branch to the future. We open our academic libraries to scholars, be they 8, 18, or 80. Any innovation initiative must further this cause of libraries simply becoming an agency of elite solutions, not agents of change. If all we do is pass back a society that ignores these folks, that puts them in dangerous settings, that looks at refugees and equates religion with terrorism, if we stand by and do nothing and do not support that, that's not innovative, that's not good service, that's unethical. The innovation should be about making this happen. And since we're on the topic of false equivalencies, let me give you one last one. Librarianship is not obsolete. Now, I could give you the happy talk. We love libraries, they're great. People are reading. My wife loves Disney, so I just sometimes piss her off with that. Hey, Annie, you're looking hot tonight. So freaks her out. Gorge, I guess that is. Anyway, but I'm not going to give you that. First of all, by the way, reading is up, attendance is up, people coming to our libraries are up. We've done an amazing job of reinventing our brands as community hubs. We've shown that libraries are not simply warehouses, but professionals that make things happen. We deserve an immense amount of congratulations because that happened by everyone in this room taking the time to think about what our communities need. Bravo. And it's happening. People see it. People understand it. People love it. People are moving past, as John Palfrey said, the old nostalgia to a new nostalgia. Instead of looking at libraries as they were 20 years ago, they're coming in today and they're going, yes! I went to Rogers today, right out here, to get more data. Because once again, 1 gigabit's not enough to change the world, but... And the guy said, oh, where are you from? Syracuse? Oh, Orange! Yeah. So why are you here? I'm talking at the library conference. He goes, oh, what's happening in libraries these days? And I thought that was just sort of a standard, what's happening in libraries these days? He's like, no, really, what's happening in libraries? I said, well, what? I said, I happen to know a little bit folks in the Toronto Public Library. You can go there and you can print out your own books. You can do 3D printing. He goes, you can 3D print books? I said, well, yes, but you know other things as well. And then, of course, then I showed him my nice fish, And, oh, really? That's amazing. That's great. So it's happening, folks. It's happening. Congratulations. It's happening. We have worked hard. I see wonderful award winners. I see advocates. I see brilliant people in this room that every day with passion push this field forward. We may not always agree on everything. We will have arguments and disagreements and fundamental things. Absolutely, but we still push forward for libraries. But we must also acknowledge that that world is different than it was. Libraries are not dying, but we have lost our monopoly. If you used to talk about what is the information place, I won't even go into the information one. It was the library, right? We had desks said, and curfew shall not fall tonight, and Catherine Hepburn said wonderful things. It was a library. You needed big data? That was a library. You needed homework help? That was a library. You needed literature and read? That was a library. And now, that's Google, and the library, and Amazon, and the library, and your school, and government, and databases, and materials, and there's all sorts of different venues. We did such a good job showing the value of information that we became a magnet for other industries that have come in and utilized what we know. Amazon began as books in print with an order form. I mean, really, right? Metadata. America could not destroy your privacy until we gave them metadata. So it's all your fault that my son in 8th grade came home from doing a report on the NSA. I said, how'd the report go? He walked over to the laptop, took out a Post-it note, and put it above the webcam. I said, Libraries have lost their monopoly, but not their value, not their importance, and definitely not their future. We have an opportunity. We have an obligation. The obligation of innovation, the obligation of making a change, the obligation that you have by coming here today, by accepting that title, by getting the degree, by opening the door, by calling yourself a librarian. The obligation that you must accept today is that it is not enough for us to fix, change, innovate, create, empower libraries. We now have it on our shoulders, and it is a heavy load to bear, all of society. We have it to take our values, our principles, our understanding, and say this is not how you use metadata. You cannot have information, organization, and access without an equal value and fealty to privacy. You cannot have access to education and learning and creating a way for people to know and monitor them and monetize their data at the same time. Those are incongruent ideas. They don't fit. That's not innovation. That's exploitation. We are now the force, the missionaries. We are now the troops that don't simply marshal in our barracks, that don't simply wait for people to come in, who don't simply accept that, oh, we'll change society once we get past the stacks. We are the society, we are the obligation, we are the foot soldiers, whatever metaphor you would like to use. You are the preachers, you're the evangelists, you're the choir that's going to go out and sing loudly. As librarians, we must now leave the safety and confines of our libraries, leave them to our communities. A library will remain a safe place to access dangerous ideas, but it is time for us to leave that safety and go into the banking industry, and go into the automotive industry, and go into the media industry, and go across industry, and get into state houses, run for Congress. Parliament, sorry. If I hear one more time about our councilman doesn't get it, and it's not followed with, so I'm going to become the councilman, then you don't have the message. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the foot soldiers. We are empowered. We have the superpower to change the world. I mean that in all honesty. I have seen it. I have seen chambers of commerce where the president is the reference librarian. I have seen universities where the dean of libraries has become the CIO and the provost and the president. I have seen schools where they have become principals. I have seen people accept the yoke of authority and control, not to subjugate, not to enforce, but to liberate people in an information world with the values and principles that we have. I like to think that if there were a few more librarians working at Volkswagen, we wouldn't have the recall that we have today. I would like to think if we had a few more librarians at Goldman Sachs, we wouldn't have the mortgage crisis we had yesterday, coming in a little bit more. I would like to think that if we had a few more librarians in Ottawa and a few more librarians in Washington, we might not have these discussions about do people have inalienable rights? Can migrants come to this country? We live in a society where in America, the leading people in the polls get up and spout out intolerance, and we accept it. We live in a society where it's okay to refute scientific information and embrace ignorance. That is not all right. That is the society. That is the obligation. That's our collection, ladies and gentlemen. And it's time for some collection development. It's time for some weeding, frankly. Definitely better selection than acquisition. And it won't happen without you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.